Nature is full of cycles. For examples, the nitrogen and sulfur cycles.
Nitrogen and sulfur are essential nutrients for all life forms. They are released through natural process like burning fossil fuels and natural gas, and human activities like agriculture and industry. Nitrogen and sulfur are taken up by plants and animals, incorporated to the bodies, and then released back to the environment. This cycle is essential for maintaining a healthy environment.
Nitrogen and sulfur are also released back into the environment through the denitrification. This is when the bacteria convert nitrogen and sulfur into gases released into the atmosphere. These gases are removed by plants and animals, and it completes the cycle. The nitrogen and sulfur cycles are essential for the health of our environment. Without them, life on Earth would not be possible.
Sulfur is one of the essential elements of life on our planet, and it exists in a constantly changing cycle. The sulfur cycle describes how sulfur moves through the atmosphere, mineral forms, and living things. Although sulfur is mostly found in sedimentary rocks and seawater, it is necessary for life because it is a component of many proteins. Sulfur is released from geologic sources as a result of rock weathering. When sulfur is exposed to air, it reacts with oxygen to form sulfate SO4. Sulfate is assimilated by plants and microbes and converted into organic forms. Sulfur is released through the food chain when organisms die and decompose as animals consume plants. Proteus, Campylobacter, Pseudomonas, and Salmonella are examples of bacteria that can reduce sulfur while using oxygen and other terminal electron acceptors. Others like Desulfomonas only use for sulfur.
These bacteria generate energy by converting basic sulfur to hydrogen sulfide. They may combine this reaction with acetate, succinate, or other organic compound oxidation. The most well-known sulfur-reducing bacteria are those in the archaea domain, including some of the Earth's oldest life forms. They are frequently extremophiles, inhabiting hot springs and thermal vents where other organisms cannot survive. Assimilatory sulfate reduction occurs when bacteria reduce small amounts of sulfates to synthesize sulfur-containing cell components. On the other hand, the sulfate-reducing bacteria considered may reduce sulfate in large quantities to obtain energy and expel the resulting sulfide as waste. This is referred to as dissimilatory sulfate reduction. They, in a sense, breathe sulfate. The sulfate eventually degrades into H2S. Sulfurs and sulfuric acids are formed when hydrogen sulfide oxidizes rapidly to gases. These compounds contribute significantly to the acid rain that can kill sensitive aquatic organisms and damage marble landmarks and stone structures.
Sulfur is required to properly function proteins and enzymes in plants and animals that rely on plants for sulfur. Sulfur is absorbed by plants when it is dissolved in water. Animals consume these plants to ensure that they get enough sulfur to stay healthy. The majority of the sulfur on Earth is bound up in rocks and salt or is buried deep in the ocean in oceanic sediments. Sulfur is also present in the atmosphere. It enters the atmosphere via both natural and man-made sources. Natural resources include volcanic eruptions, bacterial processes, water evaporations, and decaying organisms. When sulfur enters the atmosphere due to human activity, it is primarily due to industrial processes that emit large amounts of sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide.
Depending on soil conditions, ammonia can leave the soil or transform into other nitrogen compounds. Nitrification is the process by which nitrifying bacteria convert soil ammonia into nitrates, or NO3, that plants can incorporate into their tissues.
Sedimentary rocks which emit hydrogen sulfide gas and human sources such as smelters and fossil fuel combustion emit sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere are the primary sulfur producing sources. Some of these compounds enter rivers and streams, providing essential nutrients for aquatic life. Finally, the sulfur cycle ends as the sulfur compounds are released into the atmosphere, where they begin the process again.
Nitrogen cycle is a critical environmental cycle, creating life and nutrients for plants and animals alike. Let's look at how this cycle works in our backyard garden. Nitrogen molecules are abundant in the atmosphere, and water droplets absorb this nitrogen and bring it into the pond. These molecules are then broken down by a bacteria living in the water and the soil in the pond. The nitrogen cycle is a biogeochemical process in which nitrogen is converted into various forms before entering the atmosphere, into the ground, to the organism, and back into the atmosphere. Nitrogen fixation, nitrification, denitrification, decay, putrefaction are some processes involved. The nitrogen cycle is a natural circulation of nitrogen in various forms. Nitrogen is required for life on Earth because it is a component of proteins and nucleic acids. Although nitrogen gas constitutes 78% of the atmosphere by volume, this abundant reservoir is unusable for most organisms.
This broken down nitrogen is used by the plants to grow and reproduce. The plants, in turn, release nitrogen into the atmosphere, completing the cycle. However, nitrogen is made available to plants through the series of microbial transformations, which ultimately sustains all animal life. Nitrogen fixation, nitrogen assimilation, ammonification, nitrification, and denitrification are the classifications of the steps, which are all sequential. Nitrogen fixation, the conversion of nitrogen gas into the inorganic nitrogen compounds. It is primarily 90% accomplished by a certain bacteria and blue-green algae. A considerably lesser proportion of free nitrogen is fixed abiotically via lightning, ultraviolet radiation, and electric equipment. And through the Haber-Bosch process, nitrogen fixation produces nitrates, ammonia, assimilated into the specific tissue compounds of algae.
Depending on soil condition, ammonia can leave the soil or transform into other nitrogen compounds. Nitrification is the process by which nitrifying bacteria convert soil ammonia into nitrates that plants can incorporate into their tissues. The animals in the pond eat the plants, and the broken down nitrogen is passed through the animals and back into the pond. This completes the cycle in the nitrogen constantly cycle through our environment. Nitrates are also metabolized by identifying bacteria mainly active in waterlogged anaerobic soils. The action of this bacteria tends to deplete soil nitrates, forming free atmospheric nitrogen. The nitrogen cycle is essential for life on Earth and vital to keeping our environment healthy. Nitrates are also metabolized by identifying bacteria mainly active in waterlogged anaerobic soils. The action of this bacteria tends to deplete soil nitrates, forming free atmospheric nitrogen. The nitrogen cycle is essential for life on Earth and vital to keeping our environment healthy.
The nitrogen and sulfur cycles are essential for the growth of plants and are a vital part of our natural environment. Nitrogen and sulfur are essential nutrients for plant growth. Without them, plants will not be able to grow and thrive. Nitrogen is a significant component of the atmosphere and essential to all living things' growth. Plants take up nitrogen through the roots and are then incorporated into proteins, DNA, and other molecules necessary for growth.
Sulfur is another essential nutrient for plants. It is used for photosynthesis and the production of proteins and other molecules. Plants take up sulfur from the soil and use it to create energy and build new cells. The nitrogen and sulfur cycles are essential for the health of plants, animals, and humans. Without these cycles, plants will not be able to grow and the environment will be significantly affected.
The nitrogen and sulfur cycles are critical for the environment's health. They help keep the air and soil clean by removing pollutants and providing essential nutrients for plants. So, let's all do our part to keep the nitrogen and sulfur cycles healthy and help ensure our plants continue growing and thriving.